Greetings, BUSN 1360 Software Apps for Business students. I'm your instructor, Dr. McGrory, and today we start Excel Chapter 3, and we're getting into the meat of Excel, which is functions and formulas. And in this chapter, you hopefully are reading about these formulas and saying, wow. So today, as we do this skills review, I hope you will say wow and be excited about the power at your fingertips. And there's so much in this chapter that I can already anticipate that this video is going to be a little long and that we're going to have to divide it into at least 2 steps. My goal going into this video is that if we can complete chapter 10 and then do the remaining steps 11 through 20 in the next video, there's a total of 23 steps where the final few steps are just submitting your work. So let's get started with no further ado. As you know, I've already created my folder on my desktop, named it Excel-3. We're going to understand more about no spaces today. And I'm going to open this folder. I've already downloaded into this folder my start file and my solution file. And I do think it's important to look at the solution file. So this, when I opened it, I was kind of shocked because it looks very much like the grade books that I prepare for my classes and have been doing so for decades, right? So at the top it says grade book and it talks about what is the class size. And notice that we have that number in a separate cell, which is a really good practice because it probably means that we could use that number later on in a calculation. If that number was combined in one cell where it said class size 17, I wouldn't be able to use it so easily. It also possibly means that we are using a function to count the number of students in this class. So thinking ahead about these worksheets is something that you'll get better and better at the more you use functions and formulas in Excel. I see that it says Excel worksheet printed on, and it has the date and the time. Now, it doesn't say this is the last update of the data. It's saying that if I press the print key, this is the date and time that's going to display. We would obviously want that always to be very, very current. And I know, like you, that sometimes I might print a document, a worksheet like this, and then minutes later, 30 minutes later, I have realized an error, corrected an error, and printed another copy. So it might be handy to have both the date and the time so I know what is the most current printout. Now, obviously, I don't want to have to type that every time, so we might be foreshadowing that this is going to be done by Excel with a function. There are highest, lowest, average, and possible grades, I guess, or possible points. I have to find out what that is in these columns. So the highest score, as we look down this column, is 30. The lowest is 15. And as a teacher, this would help me understand how my grades are distributed. What is the high point? What is the low point? And very importantly, what is the average? So that really helps me as a teacher. It might help you also in terms of product variations or the cost of your store inventory to understand what's high, what's low, what's average. So as I look at all these, I would want these numbers to update automatically as the values in these columns below update, right? Because students might repeat an assignment and improve their score. And if that's the case, they might make the highest score in that class. So I'm starting to see even the grade scale, an A, 90 to 100%, and this is what a B is. And as I look down in this column on the right, I can see that the grades are entered here in accordance with this scale. I sure wouldn't want to type these, and I know that in my grade book that I prepare for students, I let Excel determine that grade based on the scale that I typed onto the spreadsheet. So if something changes later on and we decide, for example, in some schools, a D is a 65 to a 69. So, in business classes at our school, for example, a D is typically 65. Well, if that changed, then the grades would automatically change. So we're starting to understand how this comes together. I see the student names over here. Now, the student name here is spelled very nicely, Justin Abernethy. But over here, it's all in capitals, and it's also separated into two distinct, what I would call field names, or columns, I guess you would say in Excel, last name and first name, which can really be helpful with the sort. If I sorted student name over here, Justin would not be first, even though his last name is Abernathy. If anybody in here like Antoinette, she would be listed first because her name in this column begins with an A. So having these fields separated, very important. I have some nice color coding here, and I could certainly apply a lot of conditional formatting, as we learned in the previous chapter. But more importantly here, I can see that there might be somebody struggling here with low averages. And so at the midterm exam especially, the grades are kind of low here, and there's a warning sign displayed. Not for everybody, just for some. And this might be a formula that Excel is using to display that warning. It would display it only when certain conditions apply. I'm going to scroll on down, and it looks like I have one more column here, a grade on an Excel quiz, and again, last name and first name. Now, again, thinking ahead, would you, after you had typed all these here, would you type them again down here? You might be thinking, well, I'll just copy and paste those names. And of course, you could do that, but you would have to remember to do it every time you recycled this spreadsheet for a different class. So think about your production environments where you may have a spreadsheet where you need it to go to another line, and here's your product names again, or client names that you may have, again, inventory names. You wouldn't want to type them again. You would want Excel to put those names or to repeat those products or client names, right? So think in terms of how can Excel automate this for me? So we're looking at this solution file with an eye for how are we going to automate these tasks. So let's get started. I've already logged into SimNet, downloaded, as you saw, the start file and the solution file. Now let's do the work so that then we can upload. It says that the academic department has noticed inconsistencies in grade calculations across different classes, and capturing grades incorrectly capturing grades correctly is important and has many implications for your school. Fairness, accuracy, transparency. So as you look at this, to address the standardization process, we're going to use Microsoft Excel. I'll say here that you always know your grades in our course because you can always look and pause under the grades page. That's our D2L, our Brightspace D2L course management system. You can look in your course at your grades page and always know where you stand in the course. So as we look at this, it says you have also decided to standardize finer letter grade calculations to minimize the chances of incorrectly noting the wrong letter grade. You wouldn't want to make that mistake. So look at the skills that we're going to use. Functions, a lot of functions. A date and time function. And you learn too in your SimNet reading, your Sim book reading, you're going to use the CONCAT function, which is for concatenating text. We're going to use formatting functions. We're going to use counting functions, formula autocomplete to enter functions, printing and displaying formulas. And we did look at that in the previous chapter, so I'll remind you about that as we go here. We're going to name ranges of cells. It's very difficult to remember cell G7 through Z52, but no, not this time. Next time it's L11 through Q20. So why use all these cryptic letters when we can give it a name? Revenues, inventory item, something like that. Now, when we name those, a little look ahead, those names will be absolute references. Remember the absolute versus relative? So absolutes lock on. As you copy, you don't have to worry about that range of cells, or even a single cell can be named. You don't have to worry about it moving around. So that's another benefit of naming cells. We're going to use another function, which is called a logical function, to say if this condition exists, we should do something, like display the word warning, for example. Okay, look at all these. My point here is lots and lots of functions, minimum functions, maximum functions, which we saw minimum and maximum, high and low, right, was on the solution file. We're going to use functions like VLOOKUP. That's very useful with the grade, where it's if it's this, then it's an A. If it's that, then it's a B. If it's the other, it's a C. VLOOKUP helps us consolidate all those if statements to write that much more easily. Also, and there's a warning here, XLOOKUP. This is a fairly new function to Excel. So if you have not already installed the latest and greatest Office 365, the current version being Office 2024, remember you can do that free through our college with your college student email address and password. Download, install that on your computer. If you are going to try to do parts of this in the browser-based version of Excel, right, the office.com online, that's where you go to install it, but then you have to use the installed version. If you are limping along trying to use the browser-based version, XLOOKUP, at least at the time of this video, is not part of the online browser-based version. Remember that that's like Excel Lite or Word Lite when you're using it in your browser. So we're going to learn, and I do want to speak to this for a moment, how to check formulas for errors. You are going to make errors as you do these formulas. Everyone makes mistakes when they configure formulas. So don't be frustrated by that. The key is learning problem solving. How can you identify what the problem is? This is part of the process. In fact, when people lose their spreadsheet data, oftentimes they're not so concerned about the data loss. They're concerned about the formulas, which they invested so much time configuring. Because oftentimes with spreadsheets, not always, but oftentimes, you can download data from a larger computer system in your organization. So I might, from our course management system, download grades from our course management system to look at what is the high and what is the low and what is the average for students. So it's the formulas that are very important. And we have to be really accurate when we set those up so that we get the correct results. That's how you demonstrate integrity. When you check that data and you make sure that answer is right, then your coworkers know they can count on you. Your boss knows they can count on you. Otherwise, if you just willy-nilly hand things in, then people start to say, well, I'll have to check that myself and get back to you, right? You don't want that. You don't want that. So we have already downloaded the start file. Let's open this up and see where we are. It opened on my other screen. So we're going to enable editing. That's step 2. Mark that off. And it says take a look at the 2 sheets. So we have a workbook with 2 worksheets. The first sheet contains student names and their scores. The second sheet will be used to look at the letter grade, to look up the letter grade for each student. So first of all, let's do that. Let's just take a look. Here are all those scores that we were looking at. You can see we have some missing data. This is, I'm sure, where we're going to use formulas. Our dates and class size have not been calculated yet. On the second tab, grade scale, you can see this is very similar to the grading scale here. And you might wonder, well, then why did they type it on a second worksheet? First of all, because we're going to learn how to create formulas that go across from one worksheet to the other. Also, notice the sort on this. This one is sorted so that the A, being 90%, the highest value, is at the bottom of the table. different than how we expect to see it. So this is kind of a nice display here, whereas this is a display that is set the way that we need it to look. Okay, it's really part of our learning for this chapter. So we looked at that. This is on the scores worksheet. Enter a function in cell B3 to display the current date and time. Now it says if necessary, click the scores worksheet, go to B3, and on the formulas tab in the function library, click the date and time button. The formula or the function that we're going to use, they're calling now. And it's very unusual to see a function written like this, because people will always put the parentheses after it, because all functions have a parenthesis. So I want to be clear in that communication that this is a function. So we'll have the parentheses there. Well, let's do that. I'm going to move this out of the way. And we are on the scores worksheet. Verify that at the bottom. They've asked us to click in cell B3. Now, they have asked us to click on this formulas tab so that we have the formulas ribbon displayed. And this is going to be very helpful in this chapter. I'm going to tell you kind of pros and cons. I don't know that I go to this tab too much. I typically use this button that I'm going to introduce, which is called the Insert Function button. We previously said this X means escape, like hitting the escape key on your keyboard, it cancels. The check mark is like hitting the Enter key on your keyboard. Well, this F sub X is the insert function, and it will bring up a list of functions. We'll visit this later on. They do want us to come to this point now, and here's the advantage of coming to this ribbon. We are going to be doing a lot of work with formulas. So if you know that you're going to do a lot of work with formulas, this has everything you need to really dive deeply into formulas. So if you just need something very quickly, that is always going to be at the ready. But if you know you're doing a lot of work on formulas, this formulas ribbon, very, very handy. So they want us to go to the formulas library. So we're talking about, or the function library is really, function library group. And they want us to look in date and time. So these are all different categories of functions all the way across, and there's even more. But if I click on date and time, look at everything I can do. This is unbelievable. But I'm going to click on now. So it says, look, returns the current date and time, formatted as the date and time, and there are no arguments. Well, okay, there's no arguments. And it also describes it as being volatile. What does all that mean? Okay, arguments are what goes inside the parentheses. When we did the sum function in an earlier chapter, we had to tell Excel, sum this. When we said sum this, whatever we put in there, a range of cells, is an argument. I don't know why we call it that, but that's what we call it. We're going to sum cell G1 through G7. That's the argument. You cannot now something. So there are no arguments. Does that mean we just type the word now? Absolutely not. All functions have parentheses, and that's what they want you to see here. All functions have parentheses. So why is it volatile? Because this function is going to update. Every time I open the workbook, every time I kind of tell the functions to update, it's going to update. In fact, we might want to keep an eye on this because, as you can see, as I'm working on this video in preparation for the start of our new textbook this coming semester, it's August the 10th, and it's 13:32, right? So it's 1:32. So we'll see how this time changes. But that's not really what's typed into that cell. The formula bar or the truth detector tells me that this is what's really in the cell, is this formula. The formula starts with an equal sign, and it includes the function now. Save that. So we did this. On to step 5. It says the first column should display the full student name. use CONCAT, which is short for concatenation, to combine the values from the first name and last name column. And they're telling us how to do this. Again, we're going to use the function library, and this time we're going to investigate underneath text because this is text. I'll point out, they say, okay, we're going to use the values from C10, which if I move this in the background, you see that's Justin, and we're going to combine that with B10, which is Abernethy. Of course, when we combine that, we need a space in between that. And Excel doesn't know that, so we have to tell it. If you look at these instructions, look at this step. Type quotes, space, and then another quote. Because if you were simply to type space as you're trying to tell Excel that that's what you want to do, Excel would say, I ignore spaces. Remember I told you about those spaces and that different computers and different applications handle spaces differently? This is kind of one of those times that you're seeing. So if we really truly want Excel to understand there must be a space here, we have to put it inside of quotes. That's how you designate text. So I wanted to point that out to you, but let me move this out of the way and we'll just walk through those instructions. So I'm going to start out clicking in cell A10, and they wanted us to go to this formulas, and this time, you see all of our different buttons, text. So under text, they wanted us to use CONCAT, which is short for concatenate. Now, when I hover over that, I see a little tooltip, this little box that's floating, and it's already previewing what it needs. It's saying this function needs inside of the parentheses the argument text1. But it has a comma there indicating there could be many more arguments. So some functions can have a ton of arguments and some have none, like now. Okay, so I'm going to click on that. And here is our CONCAT button. And the cool thing about this little dialog box, which I really love, is that it will display values over here on the side and even an answer of what it thinks your total is going to be at that particular point. When I click inside text 1, it explains to me what goes in text 1. And it says it can actually be multiple pieces of text. It could be cell A1, comma, cell A2, comma, cell A3, comma, cell A4. It says up to 254 text strings could be entered into that little text box, or a range of cells to be joined in a single text string. So it's really not limited to just text 1. Another thing I'll point out is notice that text 1 is in bold while text 2 is not. Whenever you see an argument, something that goes inside the parentheses, in bold, it is required. If it is not in bold, you can skip it. Now, skipping it can have a default meaning, but in the case of text 2, it just means there's nothing. Now, we know we have 3 things to enter according to our instructions, and there's only 2 text boxes. Not to worry. As we fill in text box 1 and text box 2, those 2 arguments, it'll add a third when we need it. In your book, your sim book, they told you for this function argument that you can kind of get it out of the way by clicking this little button here, which collapses it, and then you could click the cell, in this case, first name, right? Yes, I'm sorry, C10. Yes, we're starting with first name. And see how I clicked it and it added into the formula? And I can even see on my formula bar that it added it there. And then I can expand it. See this little button here? So I can collapse and then I can expand. However, and that's good to know, it will do that automatically for you without having to press those buttons. So if I click in text box 2, well, I'll show you how it automatically collapses in a moment, because what do we need after the first name? We need that space. Well, I can't just press a space bar. I need to tell Excel, this is text, space, quote. So double quote, space, double quote. Look at how it's displaying. Do you see how Justin is also in quotes? Now, that's not going to display in our final product, but that is Excel's way of telling you, I see this as text. I see it as text. Do you see that we now have a third text box? Let's click in our third text box. And I'm going to click last name. Did you notice it even added a fourth once I clicked in the third? I could certainly collapse, then click, then expand. That's a lot of extra clicks. As long as my mouse is, the insertion point is flashing there in text 3, just click. Didn't have to move anything, just clicked right over there in last name. It's telling me this is what that result is going to look like. Now, do I have a value for text 4? No. And is text 4 in bold? No. So it's not required. So at this point, I can just simply click OK. And there it is. So let's make sure we followed all the necessary instructions. We put that in cell A10. We use the formula tab in that library. We use C10 as the first name. We could have tabbed. I was using my mouse to click to the second argument. We entered that space. We put in then the last name, and we added then, the last name was cell B, or B10, that's right. And I need this, that reset progress was blocking my path, but it says, okay, look at that completed formula. So let's look at that. I want to move this out of the way again. I also want to save this. But when I look in cell A10, look at the formula up here for concatenate. So I could type this anytime I wanted. That function box, the insert function process with that dialog box, makes it super easy to just click and to find the functions that we need. But if this is a function that you use a lot, you could just type it. If you saw an error at this point, you say, oh my goodness, it was not supposed to be cell B10, it was supposed to be some other cell, you could just click up in that formula bar and edit that. Excellent. Let's continue to step 6. Step 6 says we're going to use a function called proper. How do you know about all these functions? How are you supposed to just know? Folks, it's time and practice. And you use the insert function button to find functions, and you Google and you learn these. Sometimes you ask the person that you work with in the office and you say, hey, I need to change the student names so that they do not all appear in uppercase. I want them to appear in what is called proper case. This is from your English class, folks. In other words, first name, the first letter is capitalized, last name, the first letter is capitalized. So, your office mate may say, I use the proper function. And then you learn them and you begin to use them. So that's why you're taking the course, is so you can find these things out. Now, as we look ahead, I really want you to see this is getting a little advanced, because we are going to apply that to our concatenate function. Here is the formula that we just finished, and it is the argument of the proper function. Does that make sense? The function that we're about to use is called proper. It has an opening parenthesis and it has a closing parenthesis. And inside of that, the argument is another function. So we can embed a function inside of another. I want to give you a pro tip from somebody who has written many functions and created, some spreadsheets that I'm very proud of. As you are building complex functions and you're embedding one inside of another, you probably are going to make some mistakes. I know I have. So what I tend to do is do these in phases. I would do exactly what we just did and create a range of cells that concatenated first name and last name. And then in a separate cell, I would do the proper function and just simply reference the other cell. So, for example, and we're going to start into these functions, what I might do is insert a column. I'm going to undo this, but let me just show you. What I might do is insert a column right here. I might go to, they did not tell us to go to the library, so I might even go to this insert function. And I'd say, let's see, it says type a brief description of what you want to do and then click go. Well, this is selected, so I'm just going to start typing. And I'm going to say, I want to get, I'm going to use my English training, right? And say the proper case. Now, I'm not going to say of student names because it wouldn't make sense. This is kind of like Googling the function. Go. Oh, it recommends to me proper. And it says you have to have at least one argument, converts a text string to proper case, the first letter in each word to uppercase, and all other letters to lowercase. Okay, that's what I want. And there's the proper function. Here's the one argument I must have. I would click on cell B10 and look, see what it's doing there? And I would click OK, because that's exactly what I want. That's how I would do this until I got comfortable enough, and I could even hide this column anyway, but until I was very comfortable, and then I could say, now that I know that both pieces are working, now this is what I would do in practice. I would copy the function, not the equal sign, because I don't need that because I've already got one. Control C to copy. I would come over here and I would paste, Control V, and make sure I still had the same result. Folks, accuracy is key, and you don't have to do everything in one step. Now, they are guiding us through this. They want it to be in one step, but I want you to understand that if you took 2 steps to get it right, I would much prefer that than 1 step that's a mess. Okay, and sometimes it's actually faster to do it step by step because when it gets all entangled, you don't have to work as hard to unravel it. Let's go back to step 6 to our instructions. They say double click cell A10 because we're going to edit that formula. So I'm going to move this out of the way, my instructions. I'm going to double click cell A10. Now, if you double click it, you can see that I've got to work in this little bitty cell down here. I don't want to work in that little bitty space. I'm coming up here to the formula bar where I can see. I have the I-beam for my mouse, and I'm going to click right before the C and concatenate and after the equal. I'm going to type the word proper. The case does not matter as you type it. I must open the parenthesis. All of what's there is the argument, and then I'm going to click at the end, and I am going to close my parenthesis. When I'm satisfied that that looks correct, and notice my parentheses, how they are lighting up. The 2 that are in red are a match set. I must have an open and a close to be a match set. The 2 on the outer side are not in any color, they're in black, and they're a match set. If I had 3 and 4 and 5 functions, they would start to color code so to help me see that. Press your Enter key. Wow, look at us. So we have the formula exactly how we want it. We're going to go back and click cell A10 because that's the original formula. That's the one that we want to copy. And notice we're only copying it after we've got it all set. So I can just use this fill handle and press and drag, but a shortcut is if I just double click when I have the fill handle. That powerful thin black plus sign, it just knew. It looked at this other data and it saw the pattern. Now, what do advanced Excel people do? They click here, they look there. I'm on row 21, this should say 21. I click here, I look here, 24, 24. It looks good. Excellent. Save that beautiful work. Let's check these boxes so that we know we're done. On to step 7. For step 7, we're going to go to cell B2 and we're going to count. Look at this. We're going to count the number of students to calculate the class size. Now, counting is very interesting. So we're going to build this formula, and notice that we're using the function COUNTA, and we're going to count from B10 through B26. But let's look at this. What are we going to count? We're going to count B10 through B26. Now, as I select that, I do want to point out that down in the status bar, notice that it tells me the count is 17. So if there were numbers, it would also tell me a sum and an average. That's a default setting in your status bar. So I know it should be 17. But if I come up here, and you might say to yourself, but wait a minute, I have seen this auto sum button. A lot of students, you find this and you're familiar with it from the Home tab. And you'll see this auto sum, and you're real familiar with this. So maybe you even know to click here. Here are some of the common functions. And this one says count numbers. And you go, yeah, okay, but it's counting. And I've clicked that, and notice it just says count. It doesn't say count A, it just says count. So if I now count cells B10 through B26, you see that I've got it set up in there. And this time I'm going to click on my check mark. What? It said 0 because it's only counting numbers. So that was not what they want. But that particular count is very, very commonly used to count numbers. Here we're using count A. Think of A for alpha. So I'm going to go back to my formulas bar. I'm going to look again. They said this time we're basically just going to use an autocomplete. So in my cell B2, we're doing this because this is how they want us to understand. I type my equal sign. That activates the calculator. All formulas start with an equal sign. As I type the word count, again, maybe I know this function, look at all the count functions. There's my count A, but looking ahead, count blanks. Like, look at this. If I wanted to see how many people did not use the coupon extra credit exercise, count if a certain condition applies. Count ifs, meaning there are multiple conditions that could apply. These get into database functions. Let's just stick with, there's a lot of count functions. So I want count A, and I click on that. Now I can also click on that tooltip over here, but I'm just going to double click count A. The opening parenthesis was typed for me. I want to select B10 through B26. Now I technically should type the closing parenthesis, but Excel is very smart, and if I just press enter, it will add that. It selected the next cell, it moved down. To verify my formula, I can click on that cell again and check it, and I know that count is correct because I looked at the fast display in my status bar. Save that. Let's check this off. I'm going to scroll down and on to step 8. In step 8, it says that we need to check our formulas. Remember, our case is that the formulas are not consistent, that we're having some problems with that. So we wanted to show our formulas for auditing purposes. Again, this is a common business function. You may print these as part of an auditing report that you have to submit to an outside auditor. So it says we're going to click the Show Formulas button. When you are ready to continue, hide the formulas to display the values, the results again. So let me move this out of the way. And let me remind you that I showed you a really fast way to do this. So one way to show your formulas is to remember to go to the Formulas tab, to come over here where it says Auditing, and we are going to explore a lot of these, so very, very helpful. And if you're already here, just click Show Formulas. My spreadsheet view has changed. Now text values still, and numeric values that were entered, they still look the same. If you had dates, they may not look like a date anymore because the way that Excel determines dates is it uses numbers. It just counts dates back from a starting point. But if you look at our student name, it shows the functions and the formula that was used. So I could print this. I'm trying to see if there's any other formulas. Not yet. We're going to have formulas down here in total points and percent and letter grade. And here I do have a sum here. So I can see that very quickly. And to hide that, I just simply click that button again. Do you remember how to do that without going through the ribbon? Look at your number 1 key on your keyboard. To the left of your number 1 key, below your escape key, do you see what I call the tick mark? You're going to hold your control key down and tap that tick mark. Show formulas, control tick mark, hide formulas. Control tick mark, display formulas, control tick mark, hide formulas. That is a frequently used keyboard shortcut. So we've completed step number 8. On to step number 9. Define a named range for the total possible points up to the class drop cutoff point. So they want us to select these cells, D7 through R7, and in the name box, they want us to type this name, possible points mid. So multiple things happening here. We're going to see that the name box, in addition to telling us what the name of a cell is, that we can use that box to give our own name to one cell or to a range of cells that we have selected. Another thing that I want you to see is that there are no spaces in this name. It is still easy to read because of the capitalization. And I want you to start using this when you name your files for your homework that you submit. You eliminate any spaces, and it makes it much more reliable that your file can be read. Now, people call this in the industry camel case because it goes up and down and up and down and up and down with the capitalization. And that's what makes it easy to read. So I'm going to move these instructions out of the way, and you're learning how to really fit in the business industry because this is how people work. So I'm going to select cells D7. So here's D, here's 7, through R7. So that's just to this point here. In fact, I'm going to start at that in D7 through R7. Do you believe that my R7 is selected? I pressed and dragged from the end. It is, because the green box goes all the way around all those cells. The shading is not important inside of that green box. It's the green box that's important. I can double verify that because look at the column R is shaded. Up in my name box, since I started by clicking cell R7, that's what you see here. If you started by clicking D7, that's what you see. If I click on this drop-down box, I don't see anything here right now. I just simply see R7. We know that the I-beam means I can click to type, and R7 is already selected. So I'm going to move my mouse out of the way, and I'm going to type the name, possible points mid. Type it exactly as you see it in the instructions. When you are finished, press the Enter key. Now I can see that that appears in the drop-down box. If I click someplace else, anywhere else on the spreadsheet, and I use that drop-down box, I can see that named range. At any time I can select it, and it will select that range. And look at that, it even selected it from D7 through R7, even though I drug in reverse. So that the way that you drag does not matter. So if you mistyped, I told you I've been teaching this a long time. I myself sometimes mistype named ranges. If you mistyped a name range, I would hate for you to lose points in the auto grading process just because you mistyped something. We're going to look at this later, but because this will affect our work, I want you to go on this formula bars to Name Manager. Click on Name Manager. You see this is my named range. You can select it and then edit and then correct the name if you'd like. And there's some things I want to show you. But you can cancel if you want. You can just delete this and just do it again. So what did I do? First of all, you know how we named this. We selected it, and we just went to our name box and we just typed it. So easy, and we pressed enter. If instead, like I said, if you made a mistake, go to Name Manager. Here's our named range. If I click on Edit, here's what in fact, we can look at it here. Here's what I want to show you. This is a formula. It says this name, possible points mid, is equal to the name of our spreadsheet, which is scores, followed by, here's a new punctuation for you, an exclamation point. Nobody wants to say exclamation point too many times. So typically you will hear those in programming languages. They will say bang. Just like you don't say www period southwest period tn period edu. Instead, people say dot. So instead of exclamation point, people say bang. Okay. Scores, bang. Look at this, absolute reference, $D, $7. You have the two dots, which is a colon, which means, how do we say that? Through $R, $7. You're already learning how to identify the spreadsheet in your formulas as part of your named range. I'm going to close that. And did we follow all the instructions in step 9? I think we did. On to step 10. I know the video is getting long. This is a long instruction here, and so we'll get through this and then we'll stop and go to another video. So here it says, find out which students have a grade below C at the cutoff point for dropping the class. Enter an if function, in cell S10 to check if the student's total points divided by the total possible points. Isn't that how you calculate your grade? You say, how many points did I earn? 90. Divided by the total points possible, 100. In some of your classes, the total points may be 1,000. So if you earned 950 points divided by 1,000, isn't that how you calculate your grade? I think it is. Again, in our class, PAWS, our Brightspace D2L Learning Management System, calculates your grades for you, so you can check at any time. But it says the student's total points earned divided by the total points possible through the midterm. If it's less, if it's less than 70%, the lowest percentage for the C grade, right, then that's probably a warning sign. So we're going to use the sum functions with the if function. Be sure to use the range name that we created. It says you just define for points possible. So that was kind of a key thing, wasn't it? If the student is below a C, display warning in the cell. Otherwise, do nothing. The cell stays blank. If the condition is true, display warning. What is true? If the grade is less than 70%. What grade? Total student points divided by points possible. Otherwise, don't do anything. We're going to go through these steps. You see the formula here. Okay? I'm going to walk you through it. Let's move those instructions out of the way. So we're starting out in cell S10. That's our first student grade there, S10. And they do have us go to the if function. So we're on the formulas bar, and this is a logical. So we've looked at date time, we've looked at text, and now we're looking at logical. Many logical functions. What does logical mean? Logical is computerese for saying it's either true or false. Computers can only say 0 or 1. The electricity is either on, it's a 1, or it's off, it's a 0. It's either true or it's false. It's yes or it's no. That's logical. There's no maybes. It's on or it's off. So these are logical functions. There are many, and they have all kinds of great uses. Let's start with if. If says, this is what you got to have. And no matter what, in bold, we have to have some kind of test where the answer is either yes or no, true or false. Then we tell it, if the answer is true, what do you want us to do? And if it's false, what do you want us to do? And again, Excel is great because it's going to kind of tell us as we go through here. Now, a logical test could be as simple as saying, is this number equal to something? Is let me just even pick something we can see here. Is T7 equal to 20? Well, it is. So with that, if that's true, I could display, yay. If it was false, say if I change that value, or if I changed my test and the result is false, I could have it display something else. Or, well, okay, so you get the idea, right? It could be as simple as testing a single cell to see if it meets a criteria. But you folks are smart, and they know that. They know that you already know that sum function. They know you know how to type these functions. So they're saying just go ahead and type it. We are summing, I'm going to move this up a little bit, D10 through R10. Those are all the grades for the first half of the semester. So in my logical test, I'm typing sum. All functions have a parentheses, so I open parentheses. D10 through R10, close parentheses. We're not done yet. We are also learning that we can take the results of one function, the sum, and divide it by the results of another function. I'm dividing, I've got my slash there, divide, sum. All functions have parentheses, open parentheses. Now, here's the thing. If I typed in the cell range D7 through R7, remember that's the points possible for the midterm, I would have a problem because I'm going to copy, I predict, this formula into all these other rows. And what's going to happen when I copy D7 through R7 down one row? It will then relatively change that formula because the formula is relative. So it'll say, well, not row 7 anymore, row 8. Then not row 8, row 9, row 10. So it'll be errors. But if I use my named range, so the argument is possible points mid, it is an absolute reference. Another thing is it's very clear. I do not have to try to figure out, now what is D7 through R7? Oh, it's possible points at the midterm. Very clear and an absolute reference. That is the student's grade. The sum of D10 through R10 divided by the sum of points possible. So what is the test? The test is this less than 70%? So on this same line, I'm just typing less than 70%. If it's equal to 70, no warning. If it's below 70, okay, if that's true, if it's true that that student has earned less than 70%, we're going to display some text. We're going to display warning. Now, I want you to look. It's already evaluated that first statement, and it said, my logical test is false. This first student, Justin Abernathy, his grade, let me move this up a little bit, his grade, the sum of these, is not less than 70. So he's all right, okay? And so that's false. So warning is not going to display. That's why nothing is displayed in this box. Well, what do I want to happen if it's false? Our instructions said nothing. Now, in your instructions, they say to indicate that by typing open quotes and close quotes. If I don't do that, look at the answer. It will actually say false. That's what it's going to display. If nothing is in the true box and nothing is in the false box, then if it's true, it will display true, and if it's false, it will display false. I think that would be kind of ugly for it to display false. What does that mean, right? I don't want it to display anything. In other words, I want it to display nothing. How do you tell it to display nothing? Open quotes, close quotes. That is nothing, because the quotes around words, just like the quotes around warning, don't display. Click OK. Isn't this where you went, oh, it's not working? What just happened? Right? Because we did all that work. Look at your formula bar. We did all that work for nothing. It's not for nothing. Obviously, we're probably going to copy that, but let's go ahead and check off what we've done. We've clicked cell S10. We got our logical function. We got our formula in there. It looks good to me. We completed the formula. It says fill the if functions in cell S10 down for all the students. Use any method you want. There should be 3 students with the warning. So let me move these instructions out of the way. Where do I want to copy from? I can't even really see, right? Make sure cell S10 is selected. Put your mouse over that fill handle to get that powerful thin black plus sign. Double click. Excel will fill this out. What do the advanced users do? They click and they look. They click and they look. If I click on row 15, my formula should say row 15. My points possible should not be changing, and these criteria don't change. So I click and I look and I click and I look, and it's a very fast thing because I'm just looking at the row numbers change. Save that beautiful work. Oops, let me move this back over to finish that step. On to step 11. Oh, well, we were going to kind of pause the video here. We're right at getting close to an hour for this video. So let's stop here and I'll start another video. Come back.